Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving deep today into some really foundational beliefs in Islam. We're drawing specifically from a chapter in the book Imara that you shared with us. Our mission, really, is to be your guides through this material, helping you pull out the absolute core insights, the key beliefs about Allah, the holy books, angels, jinn, basically what this source highlights as most important. Think of it as your shortcut.
That's a great way to put it. This chapter really sets the stage by focusing on what are called the pillars of Iman, or faith. These are presented as, well, absolute foundational beliefs for any Muslim, essential for, gaining Allah's favor and salvation. And their basis is firmly in the Quran and the Hadith. The source mentions there are 6 core beliefs altogether, but for this deep dive, we're really zeroing in on the first 3 that the chapter covers.
Precisely. So let's jump right in. What does the source introduce as the very first core belief?
Okay, kicking us off is the belief in Allah. And this is often discussed through the doctrine known as Tawheed.
Tawheed, right? That's the core idea of oneness, isn't it? The absolute unity.
Absolutely. The source really emphasizes that Tawheed is the central defining doctrine of Islam, the absolute, uncompromising oneness of Allah. And it's important to grasp, as the source points out, that Allah is simply the Arabic word for God. It even notes that Arabic-speaking Christians use the name Allah too. It's not exclusive to Islam, though the understanding definitely differs.
Okay, so how does this idea, this absolute oneness, how does it manifest in practice, according to the source?
Well, the source highlights the Shahada as maybe the primary expression, the central confession. There is no God of God. Muhammad is the prophet of God. Yeah. It's a fundamental act of faith, constantly reinforcing this absolute oneness. And what the source points out, which is, well, quite striking, is seeing the Shahada even on the green Hamas flag. It highlights that, for Hamas, putting that theological statement there is meant to connect their movement directly to this principle of submission to Allah. Because Muslim itself literally means one who submits to Allah. The source is just reporting on the theological significance they assign to it, staying impartial.
Right, okay. That detail of the flag is certainly specific to this source. Shifting back to Allah himself, what does the source tell us about his nature?
What's fascinating here in the way the source presents it is the Islamic conception of Allah. There's a really strong emphasis on him being absolutely distinct, removed from his creation. The idea is, the greater the distance, the greater he is. This connects to the common phrase, Allah Akbar. God is the greatest. It's not just great among others, it's supremely great because he's so unique, so transcendent.
And the source argues this leads to defining Allah more by what he isn't, rather than, say, his relationship with creation.
Exactly. The source suggests this focus on his removal often leads to describing Allah negatively, defining him by his attributes of being utterly unlike creation, rather than maybe positively in more relational terms.
That seems like a really significant point the source is making there, a difference in perspective. It really underscores why, as the source explains, concepts like, say, the incarnation or God having a son are just so fundamentally rejected in Islam.
It really does. The source draws a very sharp contrast with the Christian understanding here. It presents the Muslim view that the Trinity is seen as, well, indefensible, self-contradictory, even polytheistic, arguing that Tawheed is the only rational, clear understanding. And the source backs this up, citing Quran 4.171, which says directly, say not Trinity, desist. It will be better for you, for Allah is one Allah. The anecdote in the source about al-Fadi, the former Muslim, it's a powerful illustration. He visualized Allah as nothing, kind of in the dark and detached. He found the idea of a relationship repulsive within that specific framework.
And flowing directly from this absolute oneness is the concept the source identifies as shirk.
Yes, and this is critically important, shirk. It's considered the most unforgivable sin in Islam, associating partners with Allah. The source, it doesn't pull any punches here. It quotes Quran 4.126. Verily, Allah forgives not the sin of setting up partners in worship with him. And whoever sets up partners has indeed strayed far. So the conclusion the source draws based on these points is stark. It says that according to Islam, Christians believing in a triune God are considered guilty of this unforgivable sin. It highlights that difference very clearly.
Okay, wow. That lays out a very clear, very distinct understanding of Allah according to the source material. So given this view of Allah as, well, quite inaccessible, quite distinct, the logical next question is how his will gets communicated, right? Which brings us neatly to the second foundational belief the source covers, belief in holy books.
Right, exactly. The source explains that because Allah is seen as so removed, his will is revealed to humanity through revelation. The term is way. It cites Quran 42.50, stating it's not for any mortal that Allah should speak, except by revelation or by sending an apostle.
And the source details 4 specific books that, according to the Quran, Allah supposedly revealed over time.
Correct. They're listed in their purported order of revelation. You have the Taurat given to Moses, then the Zabur to David, the Injil to Jesus, and finally the Quran given to Muhammad. And the Quran is considered the final, the most perfect, the complete revelation.
The source gives a really fascinating account of how the Quran's revelation began, Muhammad going to Mount Hira.
Yes, for contemplation. Then in AD 610, he's about 40, it's during Ramadan, and the angel Gabriel appears. A powerful vision presenting him with the first verses, what became the 96th chapter, commanding him, recite, Iqra.
And this event is absolutely key to how Muslims understand the Quran's origin, isn't it?
Totally key. It's not seen as divinely inspired writing, like a human author being guided. No. Muslims believe Muhammad received the literal internal word of Allah, delivered in Arabic, via Gabriel. This word, they believe, existed eternally in heaven on preserved tablets. The source points to Quran 85.2122 for that.
The source also walks through the compilation process. So Muhammad initially recited the verses.
Right, which is seen as a miracle itself, because the Quran calls him the unlettered prophet. That's Quran 7.157.
Okay. And then over the years, his followers wrote down what he recited. But what's really interesting here, as the source notes, is that differences did creep into these written versions.
Yes, that's a crucial detail. It led Uthman, the third caliph, around AD 652 to standardize one official text. And notably, the source says he ordered the burning of the other versions to prevent disputes. The source even lays out the timeline. Muhammad born 570, first revelation 610, his death 632, then Uthman's standardization around 652. This historical detail about Uthman standardizing and burning texts, it's a significant insight from the source about how we got the text we have today.
Right. And structurally, the source gives us some context. It's shorter than the New Testament.
Yeah, just over half the length. And about a fifth of the Old Testament. It's organized into 114 surahs, chapters, which are divided into ayahs, verses. The surahs often get their names from something mentioned within them, like Al-Baqarah, the cow.
And here's another surprising detail from the source about its organization. Apart from the first surah, Al-Fatiha, the rest are mostly arranged by size, longest to shortest.
Generally, yes. Not chronologically or by topic is quite different. It's also divided into 7 parts, manzils, for weekly recitation.
And the source really emphasizes the unique significance of Arabic.
It does. Because the Quran was revealed in Arabic, the view is that this is the language of Allah, the language of heaven. So there's a strong belief that translations, well, inevitably lose some of the original meaning. And just as importantly, the power of the revelation.
That explains why, as the source mentions, Muslims often recite in Arabic even if they don't understand the words. The power is seen as inherent.
Exactly, in the original language itself. Sometimes used symbolically, like the source notes, placing a Quran in a car for protection.
Okay. Now what about the older scriptures? The Taurat, Zabur, Injil.
Right. The source states that the, let's say, prevalent Muslim view today is that they aren't widely used because they've been corrupted by Jews and Christians. And the source notes this belief in corruption is sometimes presented as one reason for negative views towards Jews, for instance.
And this is where the source presents something really unexpected, isn't it?
It's crucial, yes. The source explicitly states there are no verses in the Quran itself that claim the previous scriptures were corrupted textually. In fact, it points to Quran 10.9495, which tells Muslims, if in doubt, to ask the people of the book, Jews and Christians, suggesting the truth was revealed to them. The Quran, according to this source's reading, only warns about people twisting things with their tongues, not that the actual scriptures were changed.
Wow. So if the Quran doesn't make that claim, where did this really widespread belief in the Bible's corruption come from? That's a big historical puzzle the source tackles.
It is. And the source traces it back to an 11th century Islamic scholar, Ibn Hazm. The key context here is history. The Bible wasn't even translated into Arabic until AD 837, centuries after Muhammad. So Ibn Hazm was among the first Muslim scholars to actually read the Arabic Bible and compare it directly with the Quran. When he found things he saw as contradictions, like the Bible saying Jesus was crucified versus the Quran saying he wasn't in Surah 4.157, well, his conclusion was the Quran can't be wrong, so the Bible must have been corrupted. He then popularized this idea. The source presents this as the specific historical origin of that belief.
That detail about Ibn Hazm and the timing of the translation, that's a really specific, valuable insight from this source. Okay, beyond the Quran, the source also briefly touches on other authoritative texts.
Right, primarily the Hadith. These are collections of reported teachings and actions of Muhammad. His habitual practice is called the Sunnah, and Hadith are considered the second most authoritative source, right after the Quran. And then you also have the Sirah, which are early biographies of Muhammad, like those by Ibn Ishaq or Ibn Hisham.
And the source points out a potential issue with Hadith authenticity, right? Using the example of al-Bukhari.
Yes, he's a highly respected collector, but he lived centuries after Muhammad, far away. He apparently sifted through hundreds of thousands of reported sayings, authenticating only a relatively small number, around 7,397 according to the source. The source implies this raises questions, about the reliability of reports collected much later or maybe less rigorously authenticated. It highlights that complexity.
Absolutely. It shows the layers of authority. Okay, let's shift gears. The third foundational belief covered in this chapter, belief in angels and often grouped with them, jinn, otherworldly beings.
Right. The source differentiates how they were created. Angels, it says, from light, nur, jinn from fire, nar.
And the source details 4 archangels, presenting them as really key figures.
Yes, the most prominent is Gabriel. He's central because he was the angel of revelation, the one who delivered the Quran to Muhammad. He's seen as the chief communicator to other angels, and believed to descend on Laylat al-Qadr, the night of divine destiny. That night commemorates the first revelation and is considered, according to Quran 97.2, better than 1,000 months.
Okay. Then there's Mikhail.
Mikhail, yes. He prostrated before Adam along with Gabriel when Allah commanded. The source also notes that Mikhail purified Muhammad's heart before his famous night journey from Mecca to Jerusalem. And it highlights, again just reporting, that this specific event is used by some Muslims as theological proof that Jerusalem and Israel belong to them.
Interesting connection made by the source there. Who else?
Israfil. He's the angel tasked with sounding the trumpet on the last day. And Azrael. He's the angel of death, mentioned in Quran 32.11. The source notes he's sometimes invoked in popular practice for curses.
And the source makes a point. Only Gabriel and Mikhail are actually named in the Quran itself.
Correct. The other two, Israfil and Azrael, are named only in the Hadith literature.
Any other angels mentioned in the source?
Yeah, a few others. Harut and Marut, associated with testing and trials. Malik, who's presented as the angel in charge of the fire of hell. And then a particularly striking detail from the source, Nakir and Nakir. These are 2 angels who are said to test the dead in the grave and torment those who fail the test.
Wow, testing in the grave. That's a very specific, quite intense detail from the source. Okay, now shifting to jinn. The source is clear. They are not fallen angels.
That's right, a completely distinct creation. And unlike angels, jinn, just like humans, have free will. They can choose to believe or not. The source notes some jinn embraced Islam after Muhammad preached to them. That's mentioned in Quran 72.1. But the majority rebelled against Allah, just like many humans did. Quran 51.56 mentions both were created to worship Allah, and the wicked jinn are often seen as carrying out the work of Iblis or Satan.
The Quran itself speaks of jinn possessing people.
It does. The source cites Quran 2.275 specifically about that. It also notes there are some weak Hadith, less reliable reports mentioning jinn possessing objects or animals, but the Quranic focus seems to be on people.
And on a popular level, the source says jinn evoke a lot of mystery, fear.
Definitely. The source emphasizes this sense of mystery and ultimately fear within communities, fueled by lots of theories and beliefs about their behavior and influence.
And are there ways Muslims seek protection, according to the source?
Yes, the source mentions specific practices, reciting the last 3 surahs of the Quran, or a specific verse called Ayatul Kursi, Quran 2.255. Especially recommended after prayers and before sleep for protection.
Okay, and finally, the source briefly touches on Iblis, Satan himself.
Right. It notes there's some debate whether he was originally an angel or a jinn, but it points to Quran 18.50, which suggests he was one of the jinn. His story is famous. Refused to prostrate before Adam when commanded, failed that test, was cast down. And his primary role since then, in this view, is to tempt mankind away from Allah.
So looking back at this deep dive, we've really unpacked what this specific chapter in Imara presents as bedrock beliefs. The absolute oneness of Allah, Tawheed. That stark contrast with the Trinity, the concept of shirk. Then the understanding of holy books, especially the Quran's unique status, its origin story. And the reality of unseen beings like angels and jinn, detailing key figures, their roles, even those testing the dead. And we pulled out some really surprising details directly from the source material, like the historical origin of the Bible corruption claim, or those specific angels in the grave.
Absolutely. And the value, I think, of exploring these specific points drawn directly from the source material you provided is that it moves you, the listener, beyond just generalized ideas about Islam. You get into concrete, memorable insights and details. You get a real feel for what this particular text highlights as crucial knowledge within this belief system.
So what does this all mean for you to maybe chew on further? Based purely on the concepts presented in this source, here's a thought. The source tells us Allah's will is known essentially only through revelation, specifically the Arabic Quran, because Allah himself is presented as so distinct, so inaccessible. Yet, the source also describes jinn beings, created for the same purpose as humans, to worship Allah who are often viewed with great mystery and fear, with many popular theories about them existing somewhat outside the core revealed texts. So how does that juxtaposition the clear, eternal, revealed word of an inaccessible God versus the mysterious, sometimes fear-inducing nature of jinn? How does that contrast highlight, within the framework of this source, the complex relationship between divine will, human knowledge, and the unseen world?
Yeah, think about that contrast as it's laid out in the source material we discussed. And maybe reflect on what specific detail or connection stood out most to you from this deep dive today.